Welcome to Cracking the Code. Recover 99% faster from cyber attacks. We're excited that you've joined us for this discussion today. And if you're looking for proven evidence that can help your organization prepare for and recover from the next cyber attack, you're in the right place. But today we have a panel of experts that will be discussing a groundbreaking economic validation study from Enterprise Strategy Group, which was co-commissioned by Microsoft and Commvault, and the study just recently published. And as an added bonus, and I know something that a lot of you have been asking about, we're going to have some insights from the lead analyst that didn't make it into the study. So you're going to get something that you can't get from just reading the study. The full report will be available to you right here in the platform, as well as the ability to ask questions in the chat. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got a lot to cover in the next 40 minutes. And I first want to just share our agenda. We're going to start by meeting our panel. Then we're going to talk about the challenge that we're here to talk about, which is recovery from cyber attacks. We'll get into the study and how it was developed. We'll talk about Azure and Commvault in action and how it is solving a lot of these issues that you're faced with. We'll talk about cracking the code, which is what we're here to talk about, and what evidence came out of the report and how it validated the results customers are getting with the joint Commvault and Azure solution. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to get into some compelling insights that didn't make it into the study and talk about what's next and what you can do to start putting some of these solutions to work for you. So very quickly, I want to introduce our guest panel today. We have Nathan McAfee, who is a senior economic analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group, and he's the lead analyst on the study we're about to take a look at. We have Jamie Fox with us. Jamie is back with us. He's been on several of these sessions with us on the previous studies as well. He's an Azure strategy specialist from Microsoft. We have Chris Dorado from Commvault, who's a principal technologist with Commvault. And I'm with Commvault. I'm Bill Byron Kunsevich, your host for the discussion and your moderator. So why are we here? We're here because in reality, recovery is critical, but it really just does take too long. This is a depiction of how long it can take. And on average, what we hear from customers is it takes about 24 days to recover. Some of you are probably saying it takes us a lot longer, but on average, this is what a lot of the research shows. And we're going to get into this because this stat will come up again, as Nathan will share. But before we get into the study, there was something very interesting that Nathan talks about in the study, and that is your tolerance for risk and the difference or the correlation between your resilience strategy and risk. And before I get Nathan to talk about this a bit, Chris, can you give us a quick, clear definition of risk tolerance?
So risk tolerance is the amount of risk an organization is willing to accept to achieve their objectives. It's about finding a balance between being too cautious and taking on too much risk. Really, it's a foundational concept for any security strategy.
Oh, that's very helpful. And Nathan, give us some insight into this diagram that I know you developed from talking to customers and what you learned in the study. And I think some pretty compelling thoughts you have on this.
Well, I talked to such a wide range of customers, different sizes, different industries, and tried to find out what is the right answer. What should their target be for testing and recoverability? And after studying just a few, it became clear that everybody has a different tolerance for risk. Some of it depends on, their cost of downtime per hour. For some, it was tens of millions of dollars per hour. For some, it was, hey, that's a nuisance. So as I went through, I developed this graphic to try to tell the story of wherever your tolerance for risk is. Step one is to understand it, but then step two is develop a plan around it and to make sure that your capabilities are aligned with your risk for tolerance. And it pretty much found that this solution allowed you, it met you where you were on this line. Wherever you were on this line, it was an effective solution to test and ensure that you can recover.
And as I mentioned, I think you're going to get into this more with a lot of the findings, and this really sets the stage well. Before we get into the study, it's interesting. I was talking to one of Microsoft's security experts the other day, and he said, this combined solution, what Commvault really brings to the table is the last line of defense. And then he went into this, what he called the NIST framework, and how this really ties how our solutions work together. And Chris, could you walk through just what is the NIST framework all about, and how has it changed, and how has it progressed as our ability to fight these attacks has progressed?
Yeah, so for years, we've really focused heavily on the first three functions on this framework. Identify and assess our cyber risks. In Protect, we implement controls to protect against cyber attacks. And then Detect is all about detecting cyber attacks as early as possible. So these functions are all about keeping these bad actors out, right, out of our organization. But here's the big problem. They're still getting in, right? All this work we're doing, they're still finding ways around these. So now we look at NIST 2.0 and we're seeing a fundamental shift in a mindset. We're elevating our view to focus on the full life cycle of cybersecurity. And that is putting a much greater emphasis on these final two functions. When bad actors get in, how are we going to respond quickly and effectively? And how are we going to recover with minimal disruptions to our business? Ultimately, the framework is about shifting from just trying to keep the bad actors out to really being ready to respond when they do eventually get in.
Chris, thanks for that great unpacking of the NIST framework. I think that really helps our audience understand how it's matured, and also how the combined Commvault Microsoft solution helps our customers when it comes to that respond and recovery. I want to turn to Jamie, because Jamie, as I mentioned, I've talked to some Microsoft security experts. They call Commvault, what Commvault delivers, as they refer to it as the last line of defense. But from your perspective, from a Microsoft perspective, what's the value to Microsoft's customers of the joint solution?
So Microsoft has traditionally focused on identify, protect, and detect. Where Commvault really augments what Microsoft has done is in the respond and recover. Commvault delivers point-in-time recovery and rebuild that Microsoft has not traditionally focused on. A backup is only as good as you can recover it. Microsoft's very good at backing up and protecting things such as identity through Active Directory. The power of Commvault's solution is in the simplicity and the thoroughness, how easy it is to do these restores and recoveries. It's a new paradigm of this. What I like the most is the broad coverage that Commvault offers for all data and all infrastructure. The power of Commvault is the automation of the rebuild process using Azure AI and on-demand Azure tenants.
Let's get into the research. And first, I want to go to Nathan. Before we get into the results and everything, there are always people joining saying, how exactly is the research conducted? Because they find the results very compelling. They see the analysis that you do and the research you do is very thorough. Can you walk through just a snapshot of how this type of study is conducted?
Yeah, absolutely. So we start by trying to digest every piece of available information that we can, just to build a foundation. Enterprise Strategy Group has a huge research library. We have analysts in pretty much every industry, every technology, and we do a lot of custom proprietary research. We start with that. We review everything that Commvault and Microsoft has to build a foundational knowledge. But then we interview customers. So we talk to them to truly understand, why did you move to this solution? What were you expecting? And how is it working for you? And these the customers were across the globe. They were across multiple industries. They were all enterprise level companies. They were able to give me some very good in-depth analysis on why they actually made the change and how it's changed the way first they meet their IT goals and then how they meet their business goals. From there, we create a financial model to apply all of our learnings against a sample of a modeled organization to try to look and project the typical company that made this type of change. What could they expect? And the results of that turned into the paper.
So you mentioned the financial modeling, and Chris, I want to turn to you. Why is the financial modeling that Nathan mentioned so important to IT leaders?
Yeah, that's a key right there. So for a long time, IT teams and business teams, we spoke two different languages, right? IT, we're talking about our technical needs, threats, speeds, all these vulnerabilities. While when we look at the C-suite, they're talking about dollars, risks, and growth. So financial modeling is the critical tool that connects us both together, right? It lets us prove that a security investment isn't just an expense. It's a way to avoid a huge financial loss or maybe even secure a competitive advantage. It's how we move from being just a cost center in IT to a strategic partner at the table with the C-suite.
Makes a lot of sense. So, Nathan, let's get into, from a high level, the findings of the report. What did you uncover? What were the key elements that customers told you was the value?
Well, the first one listed here is cost. But what really came out was an exponential increase in the impact of every dollar spent on testing and recovery. And it was every person I talked to told me stories of how their attitude, the entire view of why they should test and how important, is certainty and recoverability really came out. And in that, we studied and found that they dramatically reduced, the unrecoverable scenarios. Most of your data, I went into this thinking is going to be data focused without really, understanding. It's all about how can I bring my entire system up to the point where I can do business. The concept of a minimum viable company. How could they, with certainty and right word for speed, and quickly get to that minimum viable company. So that's the overview, but we'll get into depth in a few minutes.
Sounds good. And Jamie, I want to turn to you to get your perspective on the challenges customers are facing in today's environment and how the joint solution solves that, particularly what we just heard from Nathan.
We traditionally have had very complex environments, and obviously the simpler the environment, the easier it is to back up, recover. What I like to get again about Commvault is how we've simplified recovery through the tight integrations between Microsoft and Commvault. There's been many, many years, 25 years plus of co-engineering of Commvault building on Azure. So what this allows is that we can have any-to-any portability, which means any workload in Azure, any on-prem workload can be backed up and easily restored with confidence, no workload left behind. Again, where I like this solution most is that you're able to back up and restore anything. You don't have to compromise the level of complexity or make your backup recovery any more difficult just because you were doing something maybe highly advanced.
This concept, Chris, I'm going to turn to you because this concept of any-to-any portability keeps coming up and how unique it is to Commvault. And I think it really came out in the study of that ability has great impact on the results that Nathan's going to share that customers are able to achieve. So can you explain what any-to-any portability means, in a maybe not technical sense, but more layman term sense?
Yeah, sure. So any portability is Commvault's simplest way of describing true data freedom. Traditionally, organizations have been locked into their specific infrastructure. Your on-prem data is stuck on-prem. Your data might be in one cloud, but it really was siloed from other clouds. And think about the complexity that makes when you're trying to have a multi-cloud strategy. It's almost impossible to do so, right? And it really puts your business at risk. So with Commvault, we've changed all of that. Any-to-any portability means you can protect any workload wherever it lives. It could be in your data center, it could be in a cloud, it could be across multiple clouds. And the best part about it is we can recover that data anywhere. So whether you need to move a workload from on-prem to cloud, from cloud to cloud, or in the event of one of these cyber attacks, if you need to move that data into a brand new location, our solution is going to give you the freedom to be able to do so. And the best part of all that, it's all from one single platform that Commvault offers.
Great explanation. So let's get into the meat of the study. Nathan, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know when we were beginning to get ready for this webinar, we both looked at each other and said, this is probably one of the most important pieces of information that we'll share, in that here you've got a whole lot of the stats, you've got the customer stories. We're going to give you some time to unpack that for the audience that's joined us today.
We start with just the ability to recover. But if the ability is there, the actual speed, you had the time of 24 days, but there were stories that went into months, and then months after those months, you still were uncertain about the ability to completely recover, or if your recovery was in a safe place from the rest of your data and network. And that 99% faster recovery, I could put decimals on that, because we had so many stories. We went through a scenario, it took us months to do, and now we did it in hours. So the rebuild, and that's where the any really started to shine, because when you looked at different scenarios around trying to recover or rebuild, it took away the dependency of having to recover into the same environment. So there were a lot of great stories of, we had some type of disaster, but we were able to recover into a completely different environment. We'll probably go back to Chris to get a few details on that, but that really jumped out. Then the third one was, the improved testing frequency by 30x. That number was very, very, very conservative, because I heard so many stories of our testing was done twice a year. It was very person hour intensive. We did it in a calm environment. We brought in some people and some lunch, and we talked through, and we restored one or recovered one portion of our business, and we hoped that would propagate across the rest. And what I saw were customers that shared with me that once they made this change, their entire attitude towards testing and recoverability changed, because they realized they spent more time trying to identify what is important for that minimum viable company, and how do we get there, quicker. Rolling over to the first quote in here was a story that somebody shared, that they recovered their entire environment every night, because to them, their tolerance for risk was very low, because their cost of any type of downtime or non-recoverable event was very high. And he knew that anytime he told me I could literally flip a switch and recover instantly. So we have these numbers, but the thing that really jumped out to me is not a single story that I heard, and any single scenario that I analyzed was an apples to apples comparison, because this was a completely, moving to the clean room was a completely different level of capability than they had before. We were comparing hope versus I have certainty. So certainty is a word you heard me say a lot, because that really came out in the customer stories.
Makes a lot of sense. Jamie, your thoughts on what Nathan just shared and how it impacts customers?
A backup is only as good as it could be recovered, right? So again, this really extends Microsoft solutions to be more recoverable and more ready for continuity. Yeah, we hear stories of customers having more than 20 solutions to do their backup and recovery. It becomes very risky. I liked how Nathan said, we don't even get a really full test to really know if this works well. With a Commvault solution, you can do on-demand recovery. You can do it as frequently as you feel like it. And it's very simple. Again, as I said earlier, to back up and restore a very large-scale, comprehensive, and complex environment, it really just changes our paradigm on what we think about when we think about backup and recovery. Up until now, a lot of backup and recovery has been very piecemeal by different parts of an environment. Commvault has a much more comprehensive approach that really simplifies this.
A couple of the things that came out I'd love to throw in. The third bullet point there, I went into this thinking about data recovery without thinking about ecosystem recovery, the ability to get to my minimum viable company. And people tell me about their matrix. You had to have certain components. You had to install network. You had to have these things done in a very specific order. And if it wasn't, you had to go back and start the recovery process as a whole. And the second thing I really wanted to bring out that came out in these customer stories was so much of testing in the past is done in a very, I'm going to use the word sterile because throw one, in a very calm environment, where any type of true restore is done in a chaotic environment with, resources, with capabilities, with things that were just not available to you for a very fast or a high demand recovery. So that's something I wanted to bring out also. And I heard quite a few stories about how Commvault specifically helped simulate the chaotic environment. So when the time it did happen, it was, it wasn't the first time you went through a high stress recovery environment.
Oh, that really helps. You also mentioned at times that you found customers had a really different attitude about testing once they moved to the combined solution. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. Again, so many people told me we test one of our scenarios in a calm environment, and then we hope that it'll propagate the entire system. So they went from doing that, taking an average of 40 FTE hours to test a single recovery scenario, to in less than an hour. And I put the number of 30 minutes, although the number came out much lower. I just tried to be ultra conservative in my projections, to test multiple different scenarios. They're now testing the recoverability of their entire ecosystem instead of just one specific capability or scenario.
Yeah, and this is comments coming in that this is very compelling and of high interest in the ability to achieve this type of difference in recovery. So, Chris, what makes this all possible?
Yeah, so it's really a combination of Commvault's clean room recovery automation and the power of Azure's unlimited scalability. So with Commvault, we're going to automatically create a secure, isolated environment. Then we're going to take our customers' data that's in Air Gap Protect, and that'll be immutable, so we know it hasn't been tampered with. And then we recover that into the clean room. And because that the clean room is built in the cloud, we can recover a single terabyte of data, or we can recover an entire petabyte of data because of that scalability that Azure gives us. So what does this allow us to do? So it allows us to run a complete cyber recovery test that's automated, fast, and completely non-disruptive to our production systems. And then another great factor of all of this, when we're done, we can just wipe that cloud system away, leaving no trace of any of our data behind.
Yeah, that's very powerful. So let's get into a little bit more about the rebuild and recover faster, minimizing the business impact. Nathan, this is another chart from the findings from your study that people really have a lot of interest in, and especially about this zero non-recoverable events. Can you share a little bit more about what's behind this chart?
Yeah, with every customer that I talked to, we talked about how many different recovery events do you have per year? What did you see in the past? What are you seeing now? And we've already talked about the difference in speed of 8 hours down to 28 minutes. But the thing that really jumped at me when it came out is the non-recoverable events. Every person that I interviewed for this told me that since they've gone to this solution, they haven't had a single non-recoverable event. And as an analyst, it's very hard to say zero, but in every person I talked to, and again, I talked to a broad range of different types of customers, they had zero non-recoverable events. And I've had people tell me, it's a completely different conversation with our senior leadership and our board, because I can literally tell them I can recover anything that we have in any event. Looking over at the faster recovery. So I mentioned it a second ago, but I'd really like to call out something that was brought up to me in multiple conversations, And that was the scenarios that Commvault helps people step through. Because so much of the before testing was done in a very calm environment. And I heard stories of, we had this, but our main people were on vacation. They were gone. We had a data center that flooded and everything was completely shut down. So now we were challenged with bringing up our environment and having to recreate an entire data center. So that's one that I'd really love to have Chris give a little more information on, because it definitely jumped out in the stories I heard as something that made the difference to completely eliminate those non-recoverable events.
Yeah, so Chris, there are a number of things that I know Commvault does. Minutes to meltdown, recovery range. Tell us a little bit more about how those help customers.
Yeah, absolutely. So Minutes to Meltdown, it's a great event. It's a high pressure role playing simulation. It's very similar to a tabletop exercise. What it does is it focuses on a high stress response to a ransomware attack. And then this event will test the participants' decision making under pressure, expose vulnerabilities in the cyber resilience plan, and it really helps align executives with a cyber strategy so they're prepared for an attack before it actually happens. Then when we think about recovery range, that is a hands-on approach to a cyber recovery test. So instead of a decision-based discussion happening at a table, we actually take it to a practical lab experience. So during that, participants will attempt to get a fictional business back up and running in real time after it's been hit with ransomware. One of the coolest parts about the recovery range is we don't stack the deck. So if the participants choose the right tools and the right processes for recovery, they'll succeed. If they unfortunately don't choose the right tools or the right processes, they will have to walk away from their fictional business because it's been shut down. So when you think about these two different events that Commvault hosts, Minutes to Meltdown will really prepare your leadership team to make the right decisions during a cyber crisis, while Recovery Range will give your technical team hands-on practical experience they'll need to execute a recovery plan.
Makes a lot of sense. So we're going to turn now, as we start to wrap up our discussion, to the piece that I know a lot of people that joined today, this is what they're waiting for. What compelling evidence didn't make it into the study? I know there was talk about protecting AI data and all kinds of things, but Nathan, if you had to say, hey, here's 3 or 4 things that didn't make it into the study that can be extremely helpful to our audience today, what would you cover?
The first one of the stories about the customers that tried to do something like Clean Room on their own. And again, I was talking to very mature enterprise companies and had one tell me a story. They spent tens of millions of dollars to try to create some type of a clean room recovery environment. And after months of doing it, he realized that it wasn't a matter of money. And I think he specifically told me we could have tripled the amount we put into this and still not come up with a solution as complete as clean room recovery. It was a matter of expertise. It was a matter of understanding what are the things that we don't know. What are the things that we're not expecting that are going to come back and haunt us the first time we have a true recovery. I'll say disaster, but a true recovery scenario. I had a lot of people talk to me about AI, and it, initially looking at it, AI just taking care of a lot of repeatable tasks. That was, that was table stakes. And really looking at how the AI throughout the solution helped identify, here are the things you need to do to ensure, to be certain that you're able to recover. That the AI first it lowered costs dramatically because it took care of a lot of things that were very manual and labor intensive in the past, but it also increased their certainty, reduced the recovery and testing times. But the AI was really called out in the interviews. I put some of that in the paper, but I just it's hard to get the passion that the customers were talking about, around AI, and have that stand out in the paper. And then I guess the third is probably just the confidence they have in the joint solution. I had people tell me, there were very private conversations about working with, projects, working in areas that have multiple major vendors in charge, and it always seemed like one of them was battling to be in charge. But again and again and again, I heard how Commvault and Microsoft, how the execs were working together on this, how they were sharing roadmaps, how they were coming to the different customers and saying, what else do you need? What do you need to be successful? And they really called out again and again how the two companies were working together to, make sure that everything was included, everything made sense.
And what I'm hearing too, and things you talked about, is how that confidence customers have that as they move and rapidly accelerate their AI initiatives, that whether it's protecting agents and protecting models and making sure that that guarding against misuse of AI information, that the confidence that Commvault can make sure that data is resilient, be recoverable as needed, makes a huge difference. Anything else to comment on that came out?
Well, with AI, and if not the AI in the product, but organizational AI, so customers doing their own AI changes, it comes rapid change. And with so any-to-any is something that was called out here also. With that any-to-any, with the assurance that no matter what happens, I can get to my viable company somewhere quickly. It gave organizations more confidence in going through the rapid change that AI is injecting in their companies. So that's something that definitely should be called out.
Oh, that's very helpful. So, Jamie, I want to turn to you to get your thoughts, because AI is such a focus for Microsoft. Microsoft is leading the way in AI. How does the joint Commvault Azure solution help customers, and what are you hearing, and what are the big benefits?
So one of the biggest concerns most of my customers have with implementing AI now is, how are we going to keep it safe, from an ethical standpoint, as well as, outages and our more traditional business continuity side, right? So, it's not just putting out the agents and the AI workloads, it's how do we protect them the right way? So with Commvault with a Commvault solution, obviously integrated with a Microsoft solution, the most complex and extremely large AI workloads are resilient and recoverable through this solution. Again, it's a different kind of concept and paradigm of how to do backup and recovery. So customers have the confidence they need to accelerate their AI initiatives with this. Don't need to be that concerned about the details of backup and recovery from a more legacy and traditional standpoint. So whether it's knowing that workloads are in Data Lake Gen 2, or it's Fabric, or any of the other great things that Microsoft's doing in AI, customers now have the confidence that their data is protected and recoverable with the resilience they need.
Now, that wraps it up very well and really wraps up our discussion. A couple things I wanted to add as we close, because we're going to talk about next steps and how you can leverage what came out of this report and this study, and how you can take this combined solution of Commvault Cloud and Azure and put it to work to ensure that your resiliency is as best as it can be and as complete as it can be. The Commvault Cloud, we've talked about, it gives you the complete coverage, gives you air gap recovery, gives you that accelerated ability to rebuild. And we've heard some startling statistics that have come out of this report: 99% faster recovery, 94% faster rebuild, 30 times testing frequency, and all of it done with lower cost. So these are the types of things. We're not going to get into detail, but we're going to encourage you to do several things to get into action. One is to download the report. It's available here in the site. Share it with your team. Use it as a blueprint to judge your readiness and assess where you are today. Register to participate in Minutes to Meltdown. Recovery Range will be at our Big Shift event in November. These are designed to help make sure your team is ready, as Chris described them. Very, very effective, very powerful events for your team to get involved in. And then contact us at Microsoft@Commvault.com to talk about what's next in your transformation, how we can help you, and how our joint teams can help you and your organization. So with that, we'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to thank Jamie and Nathan and Chris again for being our expert panel, and we'll see you on our next webinar. Thank you for joining us.